Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming in. I just want to highlight something here for the folks who've dialed in. The chat has been disabled. It seems at Zoom. So if you've got any questions, just end up addressing them by sending them in the Q&A. That will ensure that we, get through to any questions people have. So thanks for joining us today. The session's being recorded. We've got our guest, Peter Whitred from Canada Post here. The subject that we're focusing on is Leading the Future, which is Canada Post Sustainability Commitments. My name is Andrew Gustin. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Mail Group, and just want to cover off on some minor housekeeping details for this event. We're scheduled from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. this afternoon. You can ask questions using the Q&A functions, but hopefully we won't, not hopefully, but we won't get to those questions till, likely at the very end of the event. The event recording will be posted to our Sustainable Mail Group YouTube channel, where you can also find our first series of events linking all the way back to the inception of this group, roughly 3 years ago or so. So all of our past events are posted there. If you don't want to miss any of our content, I recommend that you subscribe to our channel and also click on that bell icon in YouTube so that you'll get an update as to when we post new information. And if you haven't done so already, I strongly encourage you to join the Sustainable Mail Group. Hopefully you folks have been able to see it. I don't really know whether you've got access to it or not, but it's been posted in the chat. If you don't get it afterwards, I'll make sure that I email that to everybody. I do want to highlight one important point here, which is that we're regrettably in a position right now where there is a work stoppage that's occurring as a result of a strike action between Canada Post and CUPW, which is the union that represents a number of Canada Post employees. We are not in the position to end up answering questions specific to that. We will post a link hosted by Canada Post very shortly, detailing where you can get details, most recent details with regards to the negotiations and where things are going. But if you can, just please try to refrain from asking any questions. I don't think Peter, our panelist, is in a position to be able to end up answering those questions. Peter, does that comfortably provide you with any insight around answering those questions?
Yep, no, that's good. And there is, if anybody is interested, I mean, there is the Canada Post website. You can also go to CUPW's homepage where they have lots of links to their very similar announcements about the negotiations and everything that's ongoing.
Perfect, great. So maybe we can begin by Peter, if you don't mind providing us an introduction as to who you are, what your background is, and what your role is at Canada Post.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So my name is Peter Whitred. I am the General Manager of Accessibility, Corporate Sustainability, and ESG at Canada Post, a bit of a long title. Most of my career has been spent in sustainability, 20 plus years, primarily in the building side of things, although I do have my master's in sustainable energy policy. Excuse me. At Canada Post, I've worked on the building side, I've worked on the electric vehicle side, I've worked with power, getting renewable electricity, so power purchase agreements and renewable energy certificates. And currently, with my role, which I've been in for about 9 months, I oversee the policy, so Canada Post ESG and environmental policies, as well as all of our reporting. I am feeling a little under the weather today, so I am a bit medicated, but hopefully everything will be clear. But for sure, if there's any questions, just throw them into the Q&A. It's, we're a fairly intimate group today, which would be great, and we'll get to them at the end.
Yep, thank you. So sorry, just a quick question for you. How long have you been with Canada Post?
Total, I've been there for about 3.5, almost 4 years.
Okay, thanks. So let's dive into this. And maybe would help to kind of start at the very top, which is what have you guys ended up establishing as specifically what your goals and initiatives and that you're trying to end up pursuing over time, and what kind of time frame that you're working with, because there's a lot on the table, and there's a report that's been published. I'm not sure how many people have actually gone to that report, but maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So broad level, when we talk about sustainability at Canada Post, really we're talking about ESG. So it's not specific to environmental, it's environmental, social, and governance. All that is incorporated under the umbrella of sustainability within our organization. Today, I think we'll mostly focus on this environmental side of things, but I will kind of touch on sustainability and governance just so you can understand what our goals are as an organization. From the environmental side, so our main target that we drive towards is our science-based target, which was approved by the Science Based Target Institute, and that is net zero by 2050. So that's the key piece, and that's at least net zero in this context. It means at least a 90% reduction in GHG emissions. So that's scope 1 emissions, which is direct emissions, so anything that comes out of to heat our buildings or to move our fleet around, burning any fossil fuels. Scope 2 emissions, which is the electricity or the emissions associated with the electricity we use. And then scope 3 emissions, which is for us, and I'll talk get a little bit more detail later, but it's the big one. About 90% of our emissions are scope 3, and those emissions are from our suppliers primarily. Excuse me. So by 2050, a 90% reduction in those emissions and to get to net zero. And then more immediately, by 2030, we have a 50% reduction target of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So those emissions that we control, that's also in line with our science-based target. So those are our key drivers from a GHG emission reduction perspective. We do have a 2030 target for non-emitting electricity. And I say non-emitting as opposed to renewable because we include nuclear within that mix. A lot of our operations are in Ontario, so we don't just focus on renewable electricity. We can count nuclear towards our goal. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult just because there is so much nuclear electricity provided in Ontario. Also, to get us towards those two, the 2030 and the 2050 target, we have a 2040 target to convert our fleet to electric. So we have about 14,000 vehicles in Canada. We are I think the largest in the fleet in Canada. And so 100% electric vehicles by 2040, with a big chunk by 2030, which will help us get those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that we need. And then the last one on the environmental side is zero waste. So we have a 90%, again, it's similar to the net zero emissions, zero waste in this case, it means within the industry, a 90% of waste is not going to the landfill. So we can achieve that either through reductions, through recycling, through reuse, lots of different methods, just as long as it's not landing up in the landfill. So that's kind of our environmental pillar. Within the social side of things, we are very focused on ED&I, so equity, diversity, and inclusion. In particular, we want to align with the labor market availability. So if 20% of Canadians are people with disabilities, then we want to make sure that at least 80% of that, so 16% of our workforce is comprises people with disabilities as well. So we do that for 4 main groups. We have people with disabilities, members of visible minorities, women, and Indigenous peoples. So I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what those numbers are, but all of this is included in our sustainability report, which is anyone's interested, I would definitely suggest going to take a look. It's on our webpage, just Sustainability Report Canada Post. You can search and it will come right up. But it goes into a lot of detail. And we made great progress in those 4 areas over the last few years. Members of visible minorities, we've already met our target, and the others are getting quite a bit closer. We also have goals related to ED&I through our procurement process. And so, for instance, we have by 2025, 5% of our spend is to be with um, companies run by Indigenous peoples, just as an example. But we also have for the other three groups as well, there's some targets that are either in place or being developed for those groups as well. And one of the big ones that's directly under my purview is for accessibility. We have a requirement from the federal government that all of our entire organization be barrier free by 2040. So that includes things like our buildings, post offices, people need to be able to access it, our digital offerings. So if we have something on the web, it needs to be accessible. And there's a few other categories within that. And we do have a accessibility plan that we do by legislation. We have to do every 3 years, and progress reports on how we're doing with that plan. So we're just releasing our 2024 progress report within the next 2 weeks. It needs to be out before December 31st. It's been approved by our board, or just getting it all ready to go. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that, and it outlines everything that we're doing from an accessibility standpoint.
So you mentioned a lot of I hope you don't mind, but I just want to kind of
Sure.
go on a minor segue on a couple of things here, because you mentioned some things that I wasn't aware of before. I suspect a lot of other people may end up not being aware of. You mentioned non-emitting sources. Sorry, do you have a specific reduction target in terms of your sourcing from non-emitting resources as well? Is there something specific that you guys are looking at converting away from, like nuclear, for instance, as a potential towards renewable sources, or am I misreading that statement?
So for now, our only target is to get off electricity that is produced using fossil fuels.
Ah,
So
okay,
we can
gotcha.
use that either through renewable sources, wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear. So we have a 95% target by 2030. So 95% of our electricity is to be non-emitting by 2030. And I think currently we're at high 80s anyways. Recently, just to delve into it a little bit more, over the last couple of years, so 2 years ago, we entered into a power purchase agreement. So it's a 25-year agreement for all of our operations in the province of Alberta. So we are purchasing solely green energy, and that's all renewable energy within the province of Alberta. And then January 1 of 2024, we entered into a similar agreement with Sask Power. So for the province of Saskatchewan, we are only purchasing clean electricity. So that comprises, Sask Power. There are a couple other small utilities within Saskatchewan, but that's about 95% of our electricity use within that province. So those two agreements have drastically reduced our Scope 2 emissions because they were the two dirtiest grids in the country. And right now we're working with the federal government to have a similar agreement in Nova Scotia, where with Nova Scotia Power, they have a green choice program, and so we're working on that. But that probably won't become operational until 2027, I think, is their timeline. They're just going to be building stuff over the next couple of years.
Okay. So, you talked around your EDI initiatives and the potential impact that it ends up having from a sourcing point of view to your suppliers, and trying to work with, various groups across a number of different elements in the spectrum around there. But maybe more broadly, like if you're looking at all of the stuff that you guys are doing right now, what's the impact that it's going to end up having from, a customer perspective? Because there's, a lot of the people who are on this call are folks who ship mail
Mm-hmm.
into your facilities, and I think it's interesting for them to make an understanding as to what's the impact going to be from them, for them specifically.
Yeah, for sure. And really what it boils down to is there's a lot of opportunities there for our customers because we are so driven. I would suggest, and we've done the market research to take a look at what a lot of our competitors are doing, and we are more advanced, I would say, than a lot of other um, organizations in the same field as us. So particularly for customers that have specific GHG reduction targets, including scope 3 emissions, by reducing our footprint, we can be partners in working with our customers to also reduce their footprint. And not only from a GHG emissions perspective, which is very important, and we are targeting that a lot, but from all the other things I mentioned, like ED&I, a lot of organizations have policies around groups that companies that they work with, and their ED&I or ethics policies. And so we are very strong from that perspective and really pushing the envelope as much as we can to meet our targets in those areas, which I think allows our customers and will continue to distinguish us within the sector and allow our customers who are partnered with us to reap the benefits of those policies.
So there's a sorry, I'm just trying to kind of formulate the question here specifically. Like, how can you guys ended up having, I believe, and I could be dead wrong on this one, a um a carbon neutral delivery option available on the packaging side of things.
Mhm.
That option doesn't end up existing on the mail side of things, correct? Correct? Is that correct?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. I think it's everything. Yeah, I think it's all of our parcels and packets that are not flown. So everything that is by vehicle. So as soon as it gets up into the air, it doesn't count. But for most of our parcels and packets, they are driven, depending on where they're going from to and what the timeline is. So it would cover all those pieces. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Um,
that is, yeah, so that's our carbon neutral shipping program, which, encourage anyone to take a look into it. So essentially what we're doing there is purchasing carbon offsets. There's a great project. The name escapes me at the moment, but I can follow up and find out what it is. I think it's the Three Forest Project, I want to say, but it's an indigenous-led carbon carbon reduction project, basically protecting a forest and replanting trees. And so we purchase carbon offsets through that program in order to offset any of the emissions associated with the parcels and packets that under that project.
okay. And I'll once we finish the recording here, we'll definitely post all of the links to all of those resources afterwards. So Peter, I may end up asking you to provide some resource links in addition to what we've got to that. So if we can maybe kind of segue into something, because we're talking about deliveries and means by which to deliver. You guys have ended up taking, some fairly significant steps with regards to transitioning your vehicle fleet. I know I saw the launch a couple of years ago here on another rainy day in Ottawa. Um, I don't know if people necessarily end up seeing that out in their neighborhoods, but maybe you can, itemize, what you folks have ended up doing with regards to your fleet and what are some of the activities that you've ended up engaging with out in the field.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So really, it's interesting because we started with our fleet. It's been almost 20. I think 2008 was the first time we had an electric vehicle, which is much sooner than most people would have expected. So we've been dabbling with it for a long time. We made a big move towards hybrid vehicles a number of years ago, but more recently we have 100 electric vehicles in our fleet that are out and operational. And you might still not see them everywhere because they are when we roll them out, we roll them out to specific post offices. So we have one in Nanaimo, BC, and we have 5 in Quebec. And the reason why we chose those locations was because they have such a clean electricity grid. We didn't want to get rid of our scope 1 emissions, stopping burning fossil fuels and start increase our scope 2 emissions at the same time. So we rolled out in those two provinces to start out with. So those were rolled out in 2023. It was a long process. The electric vehicle piece is more complicated, I think, than a lot of people would expect, largely because of the infrastructure that we need to put into place, the chargers that we need to install. And when we were rolling out the first 100, it was, we had consultants helping us to design it, but we did take a fairly conservative approach just because we didn't want to, we couldn't be in a situation where we couldn't operate the vehicles. That would be in the Nanaimo, BC, there's 14 vehicles at that post office. All of them are electric. If they didn't work, that's not acceptable. So we took a bit of a conservative approach as we started. And then our plan was always to operate those 100 vehicles over a couple winters and summers, but to really see the impacts that how long did we need to charge them overnight in order for them to be fully 100% battery? What kind of impact would the cold weather, particularly in Quebec, what impact would the cold weather have on the battery usage? Because typically for an electric vehicle, you're looking at a 40 to 50% reduction in the kilometers you can travel because of the cold weather. So right now we're at a point where we have gathered all that data. We're developing those currently, and they're almost complete, those standard design guidelines that we're going to use to roll out over the coming years from now to 2040 for the rest of our fleet. So we're going to be kind of starting on that in 2025, and then it's just building up and building up until we hit 100% by 2040.
So just to that point, and you're talking about the impact of cold weather in terms of distance potentially being driven. Have you guys ended up entertaining any other options, from a zero emissions perspective other than pure electrification? What immediately comes to mind are things like hydrogen fuel cells and the like.
We've looked into it. To be honest, we're very lucky as a delivery company because we don't drive very far distances. Our average kilometers per day for our route is maybe 30. So when you're talking about most batteries are sufficient that even with the significant reduction in runtime, in the kilometers that they can drive, we can still get through a day with no problems. So from our perspective, electric vehicles really meet our needs. On some of our longer routes, that may not be the case. And if we're particularly when we get towards, because most of our vehicles, let me back up a sec. Most of our vehicles are last mile delivery. 12,000 to the 14,000. That's going from your post office to your home or to your community mailbox. But we do have vehicles that go from our plants, plant to plant or plant to depot, 5-ton trucks and the very large trucks. Those we are holding off on for now. I think we have one 5-ton that we're testing out, electric. But besides that, we're kind of waiting for the technology to improve and keeping a close eye on, maybe that's hydrogen, maybe it's electricity. If batteries can be improved and you can get more kilometers out of it, shorter charge time, that sort of thing. So we are keeping an eye on the technologies that are available and testing out a few things. But right now, for the majority of our fleet, the electric vehicles that are kind of coming onto the market should be, and that's one of the great things about the testing that we've done with the first 100. It's really shown that, yeah, for the most part, unless we have a route in that's driving 70 kilometers a day, the vast majority of our fleet, what we found is that we're okay on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes for some of our routes, they only need to charge once a week or once every few days, particularly in the summer. So it's been pretty successful so far from making sure that we have what we need in order to deliver the mail and complete our operations. But for sure, our fleet team is looking closely at all of our all the different technologies are out there. And as we get closer to 2030 and beyond, and technology will, it's been such a quick change over the past 5 years, over the next five and the next 10, it's going to be even more so. And so we are keeping abreast of the changes that are happening in the industry.
Just one other question on the delivery side of things. Um, one observation that I made, I did a short little trip in Europe about a month ago or so, and noticed that La Poste in France and the Spanish Postal Service um, utilize a very different methodology of actually getting mailed into people's hands, in the sense that they have like e-bikes and bikes in a lot of cases and whatnot. I also happen to be in an area here in Ottawa where one of your affiliated companies, which is Purolator, has been testing e-bike deliveries, and I see a lot of them around here. There had been some word that there may have been some of that testing with Canada Post at one point. And is that the case? And maybe if you can share what you guys have ended up finding with some of those tests.
Yeah, absolutely. I can give an overview. I mean, it wasn't my project, but definitely we have, excuse me, we have tested out e-trikes over the past couple of years. I think we first rolled them out in 2021 or maybe summer of 2022 in Montreal and Vancouver, I think was the areas where they were measuring them. What we found was that during the summer months, it worked reasonably well, particularly in those really dense urban areas like Montreal or downtown Toronto or Vancouver. Those were the areas where they would work the best. But definitely a lot of difficulty with the technology in more in the winter months. So it became a little bit difficult, excuse me, to roll out entirely. They're still testing them, and as new technological offerings become available, because the ones that we tried, they didn't operate as well as we had hoped, is what it boils down to. So we haven't rolled them out more broadly, but we're continuing to test as new technologies come out to see if they would be operational. We did something similar in Ottawa, actually, right around my neighborhood, because I'm in Ottawa. What are called low speed vehicles. So it's only for neighborhoods that drive, the max speed is 40 kilometers an hour. So it's basically an electric vehicle, but really for those very short routes. It's almost like an e-trike. It just it can drive. They're quite small, but really interesting opportunity. And one of the real benefits of that is that the battery is smaller, charge time is smaller, which is okay, but the vehicles themselves take up less space. What we found as one of the biggest difficulties that we've encountered through the first 100 vehicles that we implemented was real estate. We have a lot of post offices everywhere. They were designed for the existing fleet, the space, and they're all, especially if we're looking at urban Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, space is at a premium. And as soon as you start adding in chargers, and because we are moving more and more from letter mail to packages, vehicles in general, they're getting a little bit larger. And so we found that one of the biggest difficulties we've had in rolling these out, and what we're going to be rolling out in the future, is real estate. The parking area becomes very packed. Yeah.
Interesting. So, you talked about this before in your intro piece. We've covered it peripherally in another session that we hosted back in the spring. But can you kind of maybe talk to us about, Canada Post's waste management and recycling within its operations, and kind of highlight what efforts have been put in place with regards to that. And I think there's another component to that too. When I think of waste management, I think a lot of people think about packaging and the like, but you guys also think about this from a construction waste point of view, right? And that kind of thing too. So do you want
Yeah.
to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I did mention we have our zero waste target, which is at least a 90% reduction of waste going to a landfill, or 90% of our waste, not going to a landfill. excuse me, but really there's three components to waste that we look at. One is our operations. So, and that's where the vast majority of our waste is. And within our operations, there's kind of two components. There's the admin waste. So, think within a plant, you have some offices, you have our lunchrooms. Um, so where just people with their own specific waste, and that's about 2% of our waste. It's fairly small. The vast majority of that waste comes from our floor. So the operations within our plants and depots, that's 90%, 98% of that waste. Primarily cardboard, as you would expect, paper, and wooden pallets is a big one because the waste industry is all about weight. Wooden pallets are very expensive. So we have, I think, as of 2024, the Q3 of 2024, I think our waste diversion is around 68, 69%. I'm trying to remember, but it's in that area. Our sustainability report will have specific information about what our 2023 results were, but we have increased our diversion rate in 2024 on our way to getting towards 90% by 2030. But that operations piece is kind of the first hurdle we really tackled. There are some difficulties. I won't get into too much specifics, but there are some difficulties there because in some of our locations, most of our 3,000 properties across the country, 2/3 plus we own, but we do lease a lot of sites, and often in a lease, it will be the landlord that takes care of the waste. And so there's different processes that are happening there. But what we've done as we started on our zero waste journey for operations is rolling out what we call our zero waste in our facilities program, where we are targeting plants and depots. And it's not so much, there's not a lot of infrastructure involved. We have new bins for the admin areas where they have, and we had recycling bins before, but to standardize them more now. But most of it deals with our operational side and organizing the waste streams and making sure that we have processes and procedures in place to ensure that waste doesn't, or whatever the waste is, doesn't end up in the landfill. It ends up in the recycling or reuse areas. So that's where a lot of our focus has been, and it's been pretty successful to date. One of the things from an employee perspective is that's a lot of the feedback that we get from the environmental side. Employees don't necessarily see the GHG reduction initiatives that we do. I mean, they see the vehicles, but it's still fairly small. They don't see, when we take out a fossil fuel boiler and put in an electric, an air source heat pump or anything like that. But they do see the waste. They see it every day. And so it's a very important issue for them. And so while that kind of admin waste is maybe a small chunk, by putting in those bins that we need, it really helps to educate our employees about waste and what we need, because there's a lot of change management involved with being successful in this program, because you're relying on your employees to make the right choice and not just throw things in the garbage, but to sort and separate them properly. So it's been successful to date, but there's a lot more work to do to get to 2030. Don't get me wrong. So that's kind of the first slice of the pie. The second, as you mentioned, was construction and demolition waste, and so we have built into our processes and procedures for we're starting with our large projects that they have at least a 90% diversion rate from construction and demolition waste. Good example being our most recent plant, which opened in Toronto 2 years ago, so the Albert Jackson Processing Center. And that, I think at the end of construction, it was a 94% diversion rate. And so we're really focusing on our big projects, getting those processes in place, and then bringing that down to the smaller projects as well. But it can be really difficult for very rural areas where they might not have the infrastructure that we need in order to sort and separate. But again, the 90% reduction target there as well. And then the last piece is for the products we sell. So we are integrating recycled materials into our products and continuing to move that forward. We've gotten rid of our single-use plastics, that sort of thing. And we have goals to increase those um, to increase the recyclable materials that are within our products to 2030, and not only including recyclable materials in our products, but making sure our products are recyclable. So it's not doesn't it doesn't just go to the grave. It can continue be recycled and go cradle to cradle.
Gotcha. So you kind of already segued into the next question that I've got in some way, shape, or form, but I want to, you know, extract a little bit more information around that. I mean, my experience in terms of being in the role that you're in, and how successful you can potentially end up being is very contingent on engagement with employees, and getting them to participate in the problem solving, but at the same time also being participant in terms of the solutions that are presented. So educating them, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about, what efforts have been put in place to get that level of engagement and participation, but at the same time also talking to people, both about the initiatives, but also about things that they have to do, for instance?
Yeah. So there's a few different mechanisms that we use. One from more the, I guess the carrot perspective, like encouraging our employees. We have a program, what's called the Sustainability Action Fund, and so we have typically it's $500,000 a year that we have specific for employees to come forward with projects that they think would benefit the environment within their local area. So that could be community gardens. We've seen it a few times where it's like getting rid of single-use water bottles, and so we would provide reusable water bottles, other waste, because waste is a big one. A lot of people are concerned about waste, so ink cartridge recycling, battery recycling, like having those programs put into place within their facilities. And a lot of these is just, it's a low cost, a few, maybe $1,000 or something like that, just to get the infrastructure in place. And then the employees drive it. They come up with the ideas, they determine what the cost is going to be, they run the projects, and then they maintain it over time. Community gardens has been a really popular one at a lot of locations. But we run that program really to get that grassroots, get people engaged, get people excited about the things that they can do at their level. Bike racks is another common one that comes about as part of it. So that's one area. We do have now training that we're rolling out to all of our employees around ESG, and a big component of that being the environmental side. And it talks about, so it's a mandatory training that talks about a lot of the programs that we do, what our targets are as a corporation, just so that we can, because that education needs to be there. A lot of people are very interested in helping, they just don't know how. So we have that training, and we're also really specific for the locations, for instance, where we rolled out the Zero Waste in Our Facilities program. I think we did 80 this year, plants and depots. There's specific communications around, how do you recycle different things? What can be recycled? What can't be recycled? How can you contribute? So disseminating that information down to our employees is very important, and key to making sure that the program is successful. There's TVs in our plants, and they flash messages about, different factoids, or different pieces about how you can recycle, and that changes week to week, but we often will get some of our environmental messaging up there. And then the messaging often comes from their supervisors. So during a team huddle, supervisors, will provide specific information that they can get across to the employees so that they know what programs are happening and how they can help. So it's big. That change management piece is absolutely critical to being successful as an organization. And it's a lot of work to get it across, but yeah, I think it's been very successful.
So just to that point, in terms of the success or challenges, you've kind of um, pointed out a couple of key things. I go back to, the point around, the real estate scenario and being able to put in place infrastructure for vehicle charging and having to potentially reorient some of those things. But can you kind of just illustrate some other areas that have either been real challenges for you to that you either haven't been able to end up getting over just yet, or contrary to that, some potential success stories that people may not be aware of, or, interesting anecdotes that, you want to, highlight, through this too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, a lot of our focus is on our 2030 target, which is reduction of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 is reasonably straightforward. We can enter into power purchase agreements and purchase renewable energy certificates. All that is acceptable, and programs that we put into place. So we have pretty good track record there. That's been very successful for us in reducing our Scope 2 emissions. Um, Scope 1 is more difficult. So that's getting off of burning fossil fuels. Um, so not from fleet perspective, it's difficult for some of the stuff I mentioned, like getting infrastructure installed, having um, the vehicles available in the market to purchase. So when we bought the 100, we were looking for as many vehicles as we could get, and it still took a year to get them. That's definitely improving over time, but that's the challenge that we found. But on the building side, which I talked a lot about fleet, so just on the building side, we would like to. So we have a policy of all of our new builds need to align with or be certified under. So Canada Green Building Council has a zero carbon building design standard. And so all of our new builds need to be certified to that standard, which Albert Jackson Processing Center was. Um, but most of new projects will come up and we'll be able to deal with them, but most of our buildings obviously already exist. Retrofitting is the key piece to get us to 2030 and 2050, and it's also very difficult. In a lot of areas, we can't just swap out a fossil fuel system for an electric system because maybe the utility, we'd have to upgrade the electrical infrastructure within the building, which can be very costly. The utility might not have, on their side, they might not have the capacity to be able to have us install and operate an electric system to heat our buildings. And so we've had to, in some locations, we put in hybrid systems. So the majority of the heat is provided by electricity, but there is still some, so maybe 10% on the coldest days of the year would be provided by natural gas or fossil fuel systems, which we're hoping as technology improves over time, we can get that down less and less and less. But definitely it's been a challenge from where we first started, where we were all gung-ho, yeah, let's go 100% electricity in some of these locations. And that's just not possible with the technology as it exists today in some areas. In some areas we have, we have some Quebec sites that we've converted to 100% electricity. There's no fossil fuel as part of their operation, but it is a bit of a challenge overall. Something we're continuing on the pathway, but it's going to take steps over time. And we recognize that, understand that, and we keep a close eye on the technologies that are available and plan that out to get us to 2050 with that 90% reduction. A couple other successes, I would say, we've installed solar panels on some 5, 6 of our facilities across the country, kind of as pilots, and those have been great at reducing our peak loads and also providing essentially free electricity for us. But a key piece I think that has been successful for us, kind of stepping away from the nuts and bolts of it, has been, so we were required by the federal government as a Crown corporation to report our emissions, and we use TCFD, so the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That's what we were required to report to, the TCFD standard. And that talks about, if what are the risks associated with climate change in the future, and how much is that going to impact you? So we take a look at short, medium, and long term. So 2030, 2040, 2050, how much is it going to cost us if a few things happen? We look at physical risks. So if there's the risks associated with extreme rainfall, for instance, how much is that going to cost us annually now versus 2050? We look at transition risks. So things like the carbon pricing scheme, whatever that scheme is, whether the current one or whether it changes in the future. But if we did nothing, how much is that going to cost us per year as we get towards 2050? And we look at different scenarios and make assumptions on, if it stays at, because it's supposed to now go to $170 per ton by 2030, and if it stays there versus, the Canadian Energy Regulator has a scenario where it goes up to, I want to say 300 or $500 a ton. I can't remember off the top of my head, to 2050. And so we look at those scenarios and to try to understand. But one of the key pieces here is, what are the opportunities for us as an organization in avoiding some of those impacts? So if we electrify our fleet, how much money are we going to save over time because we did that, as opposed to relying on fossil fuels? How much potential business could we gain by being, the greenest delivery service out there? Because that is going to be more and more important for our customers. And we already know that, I think I sent a couple slides with a few different factoids there, but the majority of clients, all things being equal, price, speed, will choose the environmentally friendly company first. And so that we can try to figure out what that opportunity is as we move forward, as a good reason to continue to invest in make the investments that we need in order to move towards zero carbon organization.
Great, thanks. I want to get us into the questions here, because we're kind of getting close to the end here, and the questions I think are going to perhaps take some time to answer. They're well thought out and pretty detailed questions. So let me just jump into that. The first one, I
Sure.
think you've discussed a little bit, but maybe, you might be able to pinpoint perhaps to, a little bit more specificity if it's possible. The question is as follows: where are you currently sitting at today against each of the scope 1, 2, 3 targets, reducing 90% by 2050? So where is Canada Post tracking to those in 2024 versus your ultimate goal of 2050?
Sure. I had a slide.
Yep, I can bring that up
Yeah, if
if
you
you
bring
want.
up slide 6 of what I sent you, and this, I'll talk a little bit about it, but this shows what our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are. This is 2023 data. We will, and then by next year, we will provide for our 2024 data.
Is it this
This
slide?
one, yeah,
Yep,
this slide.
okay.
So you can see it's a little small for me anyways, but the scope 1 emissions, which is that kind of mustard color, it's
This
about
one right here.
10%, 9.1%. So that's all of our fossil fuel use. Scope 2 is quite small, 1.4%. And we've seen huge gains from the Alberta. And this one looked at the reductions we had from our Alberta PPA agreement. And we will see similar from our 2024 reporting for 2020, for the year end 2024 from the Saskatchewan agreement. But you can see 90% of our emissions are scope 3, with 45% of those emissions coming from upstream transport and distribution. So we don't own any planes. For instance, we hire planes to move our mail and packages around, as well as a lot of the domestic ground. So I think of that 45%, almost 60% is domestic ground. So that's just trucks moving our product that we we pay. So that is a big, a key component of what we need to look at. As far as our reductions over time, so I unfortunately didn't include the slide, but if you go to our sustainability report, it will have that information, but just from the top of my head. So from 2019 to year end 2023, we have seen, I think it's a 16% reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions and a 10% reduction in Scope 3 emissions. But I'll send our sustainability report is very easy to find, and it will have all those specific numbers. I think it's the page after this one within the sustainability report that has our actual reductions from 2019, which is our baseline year, to 2023. And we will continue that, every year when we put out the sustainability report, it shows what our reductions are from our baseline. But we are one of the few carriers that has a reduction in our emissions from our baseline, which is 2019. If you look at just Amazon, for instance, I mean, they're growing quite a bit, but their emissions are continuing to increase year over year, largely because they are growing consistently. But a lot of the other similar organizations aren't seeing the reductions that we are seeing by making the changes that we've made.
Yep. And I'll make sure to once we post this to our YouTube channel to post a link to the sustainability report in addition to everything else. So the next question, well, there are a two-part question here. So on the sourcing side of things, and I I understand the rationale to the question given who's asking it, but are there any plans to move to 100% responsibly sourced, i.e. FSC cert forest-based materials within your corporate offices, depots? And I assume that this might end up applying to some of the materials that you end up purchasing and reselling as well, right? With the volume of marketing materials that Canada Post distributes through mailboxes as part of your 2025 and beyond sustainability initiatives. Before you answer that question, I just want to chime in on a piece with regards to that. So we published a direct mail a kind of best practices guide last year. There is a site on our website where you can download that material, and specifically we advocate for certified sourced materials or certified chain of custody as a means by which to address the impact of many of our members' operations. So you can likely see that on our site as well. So you want to take a stab at that from Canada Post perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple different things here. One is from the items that we sell. Yes, we incur a lot of, and I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. But we do have, it's probably in a sustainability report to be honest, but we do focus on, we have some that are FSC 100% FSC certified. There's another standard which I can't recall either.
It's likely SFI,
Yeah,
which is yeah.
Sustainable forestry. That's right. So
Yep.
there's a couple standards. So we do have products that have those designations within the neighborhood mail, for instance. I mean, we're not producing that material. We get it from our customers and we deliver it. So we don't say it has to be FSC certified or anything like that. The one step we've made there, though, is to, I think by 2025, we will no longer accept neighborhood mail that's wrapped in plastic. So we're getting rid of those kind of single-use plastics as part of that. There's the potential in the future to look at working with our clients to, definitely encourage them to use certified paper products, but there's no requirement as it stands right now.
Yep. And just to add to that, because we've been involved in some of those efforts. I mean, if you so our sustainable mail design guide, one of the elements towards it actually ends up advocating for sourcing from certified sources. Furthermore, we actually ended up holding sessions with the folks at FSC and SFI most recently to provide a line of sight with regards to the organization and the standards that are available. We relaunched the small printer program in conjunction with FSC to our membership back in the spring. Those seminars are on our YouTube channel, which will be provided as a link once we post this thing. And then we also launched a plastics roadmap with regards to options that are available for direct mail producers or users in terms of being able to prioritize a spot that they can end up feeling comfortable with in terms of the hierarchy of plastic options that are available. You can find that on our website, along with some case studies that supported. And just as an FYI for people, we're actually going to be hosting a session to highlight a specific case study in January very shortly. So last question before we finish up here is specific to delivery. And the question ends up being, what guidelines are in place for letter mail delivery where it looks like personal vehicles, gas, are being used to deliver to community mailboxes? I think this may also, again, I don't know how you guys end up operating, but I'm wondering if this might end up also being rural routes as well.
Mhm.
So where Canada Post is not using electric cars, are there parameters in place or going to be put in place for those drivers to turn off their cars? So I guess like an anti-idling, no idling edict or something, yeah, to reduce emissions.
Yeah, so we do have driver training programs, and essentially what it boils down to for those programs of safe and secure driving is environmentally friendly driving. Really, the should not be we train folks around sudden accelerations, heavy quick decelerations, idling. So yeah, we have a policy, don't idle is our policy. And we train our drivers as such. So that is definitely something that helps us as we continue to engage our employees and make sure they're on board, sending those messages out of if there is any idling happening, reducing that, particularly because it would typically happen in the middle of summer when it's super hot, super cold. But yeah, so our message is not to idle, which is yeah, both environmentally friendly and more secure from a mail delivery standpoint.
And I want to highlight something actually, because this is from like personal reflection. You guys provide that training across all of your employees, right? It's not just specific to people who are doing mail delivery. I know for a fact my wife used to work for Canada Post, and she was brought into a session that provided that level of education. So I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I haven't taken it. So to be honest, I'm
Shame
not sure
shame on
who
you.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I should. But no, it's great, great program because yeah, like I said, the number one for us as an organization is to be safe. And so driving appropriately is a key piece. And we've seen that year over year, the number of traffic accidents that our employees are involved in has continued to decrease year over year, which is fantastic to see.
So, thanks, Peter. I mean, I think we're running over time here. I just want to make sure that we end up wrapping it up. Thanks for your for your time in this. I really appreciate, given how you're feeling right now, that you're able to make the session. As a reminder to everybody, the session was recorded. We'll post this to our YouTube channel along with all of the links that we ended up discussing. And a note will go out to everyone who registered for the event when the video gets posted. If you enjoyed the content, please share that video with your colleagues, and make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you can be aware of when we post new stuff. And if you haven't joined the Sustainable Mail Group, please do so. It helps us provide this kind of content and maintain our operations. And hopefully you guys will find this useful and helpful. Thank you very much, everybody. Have yourselves a great day.
Thank
Talk to
you.
you all
Take
soon.
care.